Welcome back. We'll start with the founders panel. I'll hand it over to Michael.
Getting this right? All right, yeah. Wow. This is a big event. This, I think, first of all, quick comment. This is a huge panel. We're going to move things along. I'm going to do an introduction. I'll introduce each panelist. I'm going to give them about 30 seconds to describe how their company is using the blockchain technology. They're going to hand the mic back to me, or they'll hand it sideways. So can we start? Can you hand Marc? There we go. We'll just go down quickly. After that, we'll launch into questions. I'll try to land this thing on time. That might include, we're going to try and get 10 minutes of audience at the end. Quick comment, this shows you how active the area is. This was not all the people who wanted to be on the panel. So we have a lot of innovation happening inside the group. We have a fantastic breadth of experience here. And you will find out as I start reading the titles, it's very impressive. So Marc, because he's the shyest one up here, is the founder and CEO of Parsec. And Marc, go ahead and tell us what Parsec's using blockchain for.
Yeah, hey, so I'm Marc Golddimann, the founder and CEO of Parsec. We are the first marketplace for media that's priced using attention metrics. And so what we've done is we've completely implemented a blockchain, which I think is a little bit different than most approaches in the fact that we're actually doing atomic swaps. So we've tokenized consumer attention, and we're enabling advertisers and publishers to actually do an atomic swap for that attention in exchange for value. And so we've run 2 campaigns so far for Fortune 50 companies that ended about a couple weeks ago.
Thanks. He's handing the mic over to Brian Wong. Brian is the founder and CEO of Kiip. He's also the author of The Cheat Code, available now in bookstores.
Thank you.
Welcome for the plug.
Thank you. So Kiip is a platform for engaging with the consumers in what we call moments, all in mobile apps. We were known for rewarding consumers as well in the moment. With that DNA, we decided it would make a lot of sense to think about what a token would look like in initially our ecosystem. So we are launching Coin, which is a media token for buying media, but also rewarding the end consumer. And we decided to launch something with Anheuser-Busch a few weeks ago at Cannes around a non-token product that just wanted to show the world that something was feasible, first and foremost, and it's called Single Ledger. So we've already done stuff and have launched it.
Thank you very much, Brian. Carolina, who was just recently just did the last presentation, so she has the funnest title.
No,
she
just
is the
say founder,
Chief
because
Strategy
that's
Officer,
enough.
Executive Vice Chairperson, and General Counsel at NYIAX.
Well, general counsel would be the easiest one to say on that,
Okay.
but I'm the founder. So we're partnered with the NASDAQ. We created a forwards and futures market for buying, selling, and retrading advertising. Our usage of blockchain is using it as our core ledger. So we write to the blockchain and any subsequent contracts to it. So you have a recordable ledger for it. We can be decentralized in the future, but we are of the idea that we want to first get into a standardized data dictionary for every participant and work with smart contracts with the oracles, such as every verification provider, and also for distributions of funds. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Manny Puentes. He is the founder and CEO at RebelAI. Manny, what's RebelAI up to?
So what we're doing is applying security to media trading, and we protect publishers' identity and domain spoofing.
Neil Sweeney, founder and CEO at Freckle IoT and Killi, which we just saw the video for this morning. They did.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't make it.
No
Airplanes. Everybody can relate to that. Yeah, so I'm Neil. I'm the founder of Freckle. Killi is a product that sits inside of Freckle, and what it is it's a consumer-facing application. It's available in the iTunes Store or the Google Play Store. You can go in and download it today, so it's a real live product. It's tokenless. And what we're allowing consumers to do is take back control of their identity and then, as a byproduct of that, enter into one-by-one contracts, specifically with brands and advertisers, to be included in that value prop and actually be rewarded in cash, not tokens, not crypto, cash. So there's a lot to come in this product, but it's been out now about a month.
And fresh in also off a red-eye flight is Ken Brook, founder and CEO at MetaX.
Probably.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Michael. I'm Ken Brook. I founded a company called MetaX. We're a blockchain development company based out of Santa Monica. We launched the first token curated registry called AdChain. And AdChain is a series of curated registries. And we're launching a crypto ad server that's truly decentralized and supports cryptocurrencies. So essentially what that means is advertisers can trade crypto for impressions. And we'll be releasing that in a couple of months. And so we have ad token, ad chain, and ad chain is all open source.
Awesome, thank you. Kristoffer Nelson, founder and COO at SRAX.
Thank you. At SRAX, we're a data-driven marketing company. We're working on Big Token. Big stands for Blockchain Identification Graph. That's a platform for consumers to own, manage, and participate in the sale of their data. We're looking at it from a meta advertising point of view, and so it's about consumers taking control initially of their segment and targeting data. And so we're looking at the scale play. Blockchain is used to catalog and manage all data transactions, so all data transactions are transparent. It also manages our reward layer.
And last but not least, Sam Goldberg on the end, co-founder and president at Lucidity.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thank you to all the panelists and to Michael and everyone here. Lucidity is a neutral third party, and we built a decentralized, consensus-driven protocol that has the scalability, high-frequency throughput, and privacy to be able to work with everyone on the panel, as well as the industry. Today it was just announced some of our partnerships, so we too are live. And we're excited to be doing a series of pilots with the IAB. So appreciate being here. Thanks.
Starting off, first round of questions is going to be around funding. We're going to jump right in. First of all, for the panelists up here, who here has done an ICO? Quick question for the audience. Anybody else has done or will do a ICO? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. So why the ICO? I'm going to start this off with Ken, because you've actually gone through with MetaX. Why'd you decide to go the ICO? And how would you characterize the process? I mean, versus what you know about other processes with raising funds?
The process is somewhat stressful. There's a lot of different layers. You layer an ICO on, already running a business. And so the decision was made to do an ICO, and we made that decision for many reasons. I guess first off, as an entrepreneur, this offered a fundamentally different way to raise funds. And I've started several startups before this in the advertising space, and I've always self-funded. And so the opportunity to do something that offered intrinsic value to the platform we intended on building, as well as go through this process, which was at the time, June of last year, very new, and still is relatively new. And so it made the most sense for us to launch a token that would power our system.
Sam, I know that Lucidity looked at it. You guys didn't go ahead with it. Do you want to comment on what you guys saw there and why it didn't fit for you guys?
Yeah, we've pursued more traditional means of fundraising, primarily because, I'm not going to lie, we're totally tempted by the prospect of the ICO. I've raised capital in the past the old-fashioned way, but it took me a lot longer in 30 seconds. So all the respect of people that have been able to raise a lot of capital really quickly with ICOs. The reason we chose a more traditional route was really twofold. One, to maintain the integrity of our platform. We're not tokenizing digital advertising nor seeking to do so. And second, with the current regulatory environment, we're headquartered here in the US. Our tech team is headquartered here in the US. And it just simply didn't seem like a good pathway to engage with the SEC in a way that I wouldn't want to ever. I had two rules in life. The first one was don't mess with the IRS, and I'm going to add now like 1B, which is don't mess with the SEC.
Since you put a 1B on that, maybe the other lawyer on the panel might want to speak to that. I
agree 100%. I'm a tax attorney, so yeah.
Oh boy.
That's the first thing that you don't do. You'd never mess with the IRS because I worked for them before in enforcement. So yeah. I would never mess with the IRS, much more so. They have first blush correctness, which is known as they're always right. And you always pay. But yeah, the regulatory issues that have been coming down and the 125 subpoenas that have come out, and the fact that they're blanketing subpoenas out there. They start small, they go higher, but it's harder then to raise again when you have a subpoena. And when you're going after the US market, it can cause issues. Also, why we didn't do this, we were very afraid, just like you were, to do it, and everybody's tempted. But the utility of it, what we're trying to solve with ourselves is we don't want to deal with that FX issue, the currency issue that can happen, which also deals with how do you deal with distributions of funds for that. So that we didn't think that that was something that we wanted to deal with as well. But definitely not the SEC. They're going after utility tokens like no tomorrow.
Brian, do you want to say something then?
Yeah. I mean, I could go on about, and I don't want to take a lot of the time up, but we're in the middle of it. We are a U.S. company. We have U.S. customers. Most of our revenues are here. We've just spent a long and arduous legal process with the most conservative group in this space that does legal in D.C. And made sure we did it right. So if you want to save 4 months, just hit me up. It's very possible to do it here. It's just going to be very painful and very expensive. But I would say, I want to quickly explain it this way. The SEC, and again, feel free to tell me if I'm very wrong because you know a lot more about this, is more so trying to protect the investor and more so going after bad actors and using the nefarious trading mechanics versus the actual core products themselves. So if your core product is legit and has value and is attempting to create value, and you're not trying to be a really cute financial engineer to try to screw everyone out of money, you most likely will not go to jail or get a subpoena in that way. That is the general bar. Yeah, exactly, right? But yeah, like an 85. But I think for us, more importantly, is we're doing a pre-sale that's private. We're doing it with accredited KYC, AML, OFAC, whatever you call it, going through CoinList, everything, doing it the right way. And that's the sketchy ones are the ones where you're literally opening it to anyone from all over the world. If you make it, basically I categorize this with my board, and I had to get my board over the hump too, right? We have existing investors. We raised $30 million in venture capital over the past many years. You literally a Series D. So we just did a Series C a couple years ago. We're looking at another venture round essentially, except we're not selling equity, we're selling tokens. The other thing is you have to keep in mind that I believe there are companies that will have value represented in security and in equity, and then there's companies with value represented in tokens. And you have to figure out how to get your existing equity investors to feel comfortable with the idea that eventually they may convert all of their value into your tokens if you eventually go trade and are on these exchanges. So it's a lot, but I wouldn't shy too away against it. And you look at our market, VCs, other than the ones that are going after like MediaMath recently and the $1 billion plus exits, are very much so against mid-market ad tech companies. And if you have a community, we have 11,000 developers, 100 million users in our network, can we use our community as well eventually to raise and then create the dynamics of movement and velocity in these markets? That's what made us feel comfortable doing it.
Thank you very much, Brian. That's great. Anybody else want to speak to this, or should we move on? Of course, Marc. I thought that might.
So we went about halfway down the path of doing an ICO, and there's always a catch with free money, right? If you can convince accredited investors to take tokens in exchange for something, or if you can get them to give you capital in exchange for a token which has like 0 rights whatsoever, then more power to you. But the problem is once you get to the point where you actually have a utility token, the economics are so out of whack, right? Like you start to think about, there's something called the velocity of money, which basically means unless you can convince people to hold on to your token, that the price will very quickly approach 0. So people start to manufacture these things called velocity sinks, where they try to convince people to not trade the token, to hold it, to put it at stake, to use it for to vote for what websites don't have fraud. Lots of different reasons, but they're all really just sort of manufactured ideas to try to get people to hold on to tokens, and it's a really poor economic model. So we decided not to do it, instead stick to the tokenization of what our marketplace is trading, which is consumer attention.
Thanks a lot. That's very helpful. I'm going to move forward to next round, which is around actually developing blockchain technology. And actually, pass a mic down to Manny. I think there's a second mic over there, by the way.
Yep, there is.
should help. So Manny, why did you guys decide to look into using distributed ledger technology with your company? Like,
well, I mean, for us, so I've been in advertising for about 20 years, and have built probably most of the acronyms that you hear today. And as I was looking at blockchain, the technology itself isn't hard, right? And I wanted to figure out how we could use some of the components, because I do believe that all the themes that blockchain brings is really important to the industry, right? Like having more than one party agree that something is true, or using a public and private key to ensure someone's identity, right, without a shadow of a doubt. And then, then there's the cryptocurrency part that facilitates the ecosystem. But to try to get all of that into advertising, that's hard, right? The social component and the political component. Most people want to know, how does it help me make money, right? And so when we started looking at this domain spoofing problem, we were like, okay, well, how are we going to solve it with the antiquated protocols that exist today in advertising, which is fundamentally based on HTTP, right? And HTTP is not a bi-directional auditing protocol, right? So money flows one way. It goes from the DSP to the publisher. And so as I started to look at that and realize that most platforms and how they communicate is through macros facilitate the communication, therein lies a big operational problem. And so we said, okay, well, now let's figure out how we're going to use blockchain or start to incorporate it into the advertising ecosystem. And that's where we said, okay, well, let's use the identity component of blockchain, right? And let's start to figure out how we give a publisher an identity. So if you had an advertisement that was going to display in a web page, that advertisement would validate itself with the keys that exist and match it against the identity in which it was supposed to deliver. So to answer your question directly is, essentially when we started looking at blockchain, we broke it up into 3 different pieces. We chose the identity piece to solve the domain spoofing problem. And then we're going to attack the, I would say the consensus problem. And then we may or may not ever get to the cryptocurrency piece. But I mean, that's how we actually incorporated blockchain into advertising.
thanks a lot. Neil, you're armed with the mic. Next question is for you. On this, do you think, first of all, do you think that blockchain is equally usable up and down the ecosystem, or are there certain hotspots you think that is useful? I mean, you're picking up a new product here based on identity.
Yeah, so there's no situation where it's equal up and down. I mean, I think that there's fundamental gaps in the blockchain. I'm clearly biased, but the analogy that I often use is that blockchain to me is kind of like we've built the internet, but we forgot to build the browser. And what I mean by that is there's very little interoperability amongst these various different businesses. There's very little interoperability amongst the various chains that are there. That creates friction in your model. Your ability to scale as a business with that kind of friction inside of it is going to be bloody hard. It's like if you kind of brought it back to today, it's, hey, I've decided to create Facebook, but in addition to creating Facebook and getting 2.2 billion users, I've also got to build the internet to go with it. Good luck with that. That's really tough. And so I think in my opinion, I think one of the fundamental issues with the chain as it exists today is there is no sovereign identity layer. The sovereign identity layer is absolutely foundational to the blockchain for everybody in this room and all these individual businesses to grow. If you don't have people on the chain, you can't have a business. The reason that we actually decided not to build a business that's based on a token is I personally don't think you can scale a token-based business, period. Because you're talking to 1% of the 1% of the population who maybe understands the concept behind token mechanics, et cetera. So when you look out today and you actually look at the ecosystem, it's like, okay, we all believe in the future of the blockchain and a lot of the problems it can solve. And yeah, we've all focused on mining and crypto and ICOs, et cetera. I mean, to me, that stuff is a distraction, and it's preventing people from actually focusing on the core actual issues in the space. And so what we've tried to do is we've stepped out to basically say, all right, how do we bring the everyday consumer to the blockchain? So without having to teach them all the nuances of each and every token, how can we bring you to the blockchain? And so the creation of Killi, we feel, sort of helps bring those everyday consumer to the blockchain because the value prop itself is very simple. Every individual that comes into Killi is one net new person on the blockchain. Every one net new person on the blockchain is good for anybody who's actually trying to build something on the blockchain.
So network effect.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Kristoffer, do you have thoughts on this?
As far as I think scalability and blockchain interoperability, I think there's big challenges there. I think there's big challenges in token-based ad systems too. When we started looking at blockchain and how we would use it for big token, and for us, that's a way for us to manage transparent data transactions. And so in the big token platform, data can't be moved unless it's logged on the blockchain and everyone can see what that data was used for, where it was moved, who are the parties involved in that transaction, and ultimately what consumers it affected. We chose to do that because we see data, there's a transparency problem with data, and there's a consumer relationship challenge with data where as consumers, our trust is constantly being broken. It's like being in a relationship where you're constantly cheated on and you're just kind of okay with it, right? But there seems
I don't like those relationships.
but there seems to be growing intolerance. And so for us, when we approached that problem, the first thing we wanted to solve was we need a trustless, transparent environment. And that's what we're using the blockchain for. And I think in ad systems, coming back to the conversation, in ad systems, that's one of its best use cases. When we looked at, do we use a token for data purchasing transactions, that didn't make sense because I was trying to imagine myself sitting across from a 25-year-old media buyer and explaining to them how they're going to use our token to buy our data. And I see that as a big challenge in the overall blockchain-based ecosystem. There's all these platforms popping up where people are going to use tokens to buy our media. And I'm like, how? Right? That's kind of baffling to me. But I think if you go back to what the blockchain is good at, and that's verification, that's transparency, that solves a lot of problems in advertising.
Yeah, I would say just with that, though, it does, this is the thing that kind of always gets me going, is people always talk about data. Data is a legacy concept. Data is a manifestation of identity, period. People don't want to kind of talk about that, but like when we say it, like when you start talking about it, I'm like, I'm buying this pool of data to actually retarget it. You're buying a pool of identity to actually retarget it. And so all of these things are exactly right, is that if you need to change all of your architecture on the ad side in order to actually do a campaign on the blockchain, you're dead in the water. Like, that's not happening. GroupM's not changing. Dentsu's not changing. And if Google's not changing, those platforms are not all going to change. So you have to figure out how to use the best of the actual blockchain and get down to the core of this data and then fit into some of the pre-existing models in order to move through it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what you have to do is fit into the pre-existing model, because I'll be dead by the time we change the whole thing.
Marc, you're having a lot of thoughts.
Oh, okay. My problem with the identity angle is I don't see why it needs to be decentralized. Like, if I'm going to sell my data, just let me store it and sell it. I definitely don't need a blockchain for that. I think when you look at a lot of the business models in digital media and blockchain, the biggest question to ask is why? Why do you need the slowest database that man has ever invented as a backend for your product? That if that product and that database is replacing a middleman who is currently sitting in between a buyer and a seller, then yeah, it makes a lot of sense. But if all you're doing is trying to take either like reported take rates or consumer data or any other sort of stated object or stated preference, you simply don't need a blockchain. It's just, it turns into a marketing exercise. Blockchains are databases with one special characteristic, and that is people have sovereignty over their own data in the blockchain, right? That allows it to be used for money, and so I can basically trust the amount of value that somebody else has because only they can change it. And by the way, they can only decrement it, they can't increment it. So there's very, very limited actual use cases for a blockchain. And the best litmus test is is the blockchain replacing a middleman? And if it's not, then you can probably just use the database.
Well, I would just want to add to that. Blockchains and smart contracts, distributed ledger technology, they have sharp edges. And what that means is they can enforce rules. And if you can go into an agreement with a partner, if there's a community that follows a set of rules, this technology can enforce those rules in a technological, like, protocol level. And so that enables social scalability, and there's a lot of value that exists in this technology, but it's up to us to figure out how to extract that value.
Yeah, so typically those contracts replace a middleman.
Mike, yeah, give him the mic.
Yeah, so yeah, I mean, that's fine.
I would argue that it's not replacing them, it's pushing them to evolve. We talk about not wanting to change or not changing, but we need to give a reason to change, and that's going to take adoption.
Yeah, so the reason that markets and people change is money, right? So the reason why blockchain will be adopted or will replace middlemen is because it makes for more efficient transactions. I don't know what you mean by, like, sharp edges, but, like, the idea is basically, if there's currently a marketplace where a middleman de-risks both sides of that market by taking counterparty risk themselves, and they typically tax for that, and then over time they rent seek and they tax more and more and more, like your bank does today, or Google or Facebook. A blockchain can replace that middleman by allowing two parties to agree with certainty that they will transact given certain criteria. Now, it's not like that efficiency isn't free. The efficiency comes at the expense of any flexibility, right? I think that's what you mean by sharp edges. But, like, if two parties agree to something via a smart contract and the criteria happen, the transaction happens with absolute certainty, right? That's where the efficiency in blockchain comes, because you're replacing a middleman who used to basically say, like, yeah, that trade was good, those ads were viewable, like, okay, we can clear this, you can get paid, we've done reconciliation, with a piece of software that says, if X happens, Y gets paid. And that's really the only application of blockchains, without getting into DAOs and sort of making whole organizations run by software, but it's really just about replacing middlemen in markets.
I think it helps on the
I do want to say, just to help with you guys, you can use it whatever the fuck way you want, right? This is a technology, and I really, like, people can choose to. We're all growing. We're very early. We're all talking about the pre-browser blockchain world. There are dApps, and dApps are a big shit show, and, like, there's just, we're not there yet. And it's like, you remember the technology like streaming and like cloud. It's like, when I use cloud technology now to store my files, doesn't mean, like, I'm a cloud company. No, like, you're using it to help do business better. So for us, simply put, to not explore blockchain in your business is irresponsible, because you should be looking at how it's going to help you serve your clients better. That's, yeah.
Responsible to not understand the technology before you try to sell it.
Well, you didn't understand the internet fully when you first went on it, did you? Right? So it's like, that's how you first look at these things. Yeah.
I started a business where I was selling.
Fair enough. Yeah. So I think there's that. And then ultimately, too, we're not talking about the immutability part. We're not talking about the whole business model shift that we might see with decentralized businesses. So you have full foundations where I believe there's a future where there's a completely decentralized media marketplace. People like a Facebook or Google could create that, or at least help fund it. The concept is there's no fees per transaction. Again, I'm just predicting the future here, guys. You can tell me if I'm like, I might be very wrong. Who cares? But the idea is, okay, what if all the money goes straight to the publisher, right? There's no cuts in the middle, but the facilitator of the marketplace has their holdings of tokens, and that's what potentially gives them the remuneration as the marketplace grows. These types of decentralized business models, to me, are fascinating. And as a Canadian, being more socialist and understanding how the whole world can gain, the whole rising tide lifts all shit. That's why there's so many Canadian blockchain businesses, Neil and I know this, is because we get that model. So talk to Canadians. We really get this whole thing.
Carolina, quick word, then I move.
Well, no, I agree with both of them. I mean, I don't think they're speaking something that's very different. I mean, there's compliance. I mean, I'm using compliance in a more broad sense because I think it's just one word to answer the idea with having middlemen to transact in there, and also looking at contracts and how they work. But there's so many different ideas on the front end of compliance, and how does compliance work between the contracts for verification, for anti-fraud, for distribution of funds? All of these things are part of the compliance of the contract itself. I'm an attorney, Sam's an attorney. We look at things as contracts mostly. I think we agreed upon that at one time. And this just facilitates contracts in an easier way, and if we can make sure that we're dealing with the same sort of standard taxonomy and standard rule sets, then we can make it fluid and seamless.
Great, we've had some debate. Kristoffer is the only person who hasn't talked to this point. Do you want to say something before we move on?
On the business model front, and this is something that I'm interested in on tokens and blockchain-based ad tech companies, is ad tech is a tough business, right? There's like one profitable ad tech business, and most have struggled, right? And you look at valuations over the years, and there's been ultimately like your best case scenario for a mid-sized ad tech company is to get acquired, right? And margins are tight, margins are small, eking out cash flow, eking out margin and profit, really challenging. A token could change that dynamic. And one thing that I'm interested in looking at probably over the next 10 years is, do these tokenized systems create new business models where value and token exchanges can supplement what you might make in margin? And so that's an exciting space.
In defense of tokens, I know there's been a lot of issues with people understanding, like, I can't own like 50 different tokens, and how many people actually have the access to even buy. In fact, you can't even buy altcoins as a US resident or citizen. So you're basically, not able to participate, like a large chunk of the global population, with money. What I would say, though, is we live in a world of a lot of currencies without even knowing it. Your airline points, hotel points, coupons you redeem, Starbucks stars, everything. So we do understand a few multiple, not a lot, maybe one or two, it really matters to us. But I also think, just like Steve Jobs, just remind everyone, technology, as more effective as it becomes invisible. So blockchain was the forefront of all of our discussions now because it's exciting. We should look at it as technology, but eventually it'll be just normal to have things, maybe using tokens in the back end to run things. In the future, it's not, someone told me, like, how could you build, like, let's say about blockchain revolutionize everything, or like tokens. What about using tokens for payroll, right? Like, if your token's going up and down like this, you can't pay people like using that, so it doesn't make any sense. But there is concepts like stable coins and tethering, which are emerging technologies to help use a token for a real practical use case, and then having a speculative token. So there's ways that these things are evolving, and anyway, I'll stop eating up time, but there's just things that can help tokens make sense.
I just want to add real quick, Michael, it's important to note that you can't have a public blockchain without cryptocurrency.
Of course.
So the cryptocurrency is a necessary component of blockchain technologies. If
you can build on top of a public blockchain without your own proprietary.
Of course, you can always use Ethereum, yeah.
Like,
the cryptocurrency.
Brian, how many of those other currencies do you trade in and out of? Have you ever bought Starbucks points? Have you ever sold your airline miles? Those are all non-fungible.
You don't have to trade any of them, right?
But when we're talking about people having multiple currencies, like a currency for anti-fraud and a currency for your coffee and a currency for your data, like, that doesn't work because people don't want to hold multiple currencies. Like, not even to mention the velocity of money where they all go to zero, but like, it's just not tenable. There are very few functionalities that dApps or blockchain apps need that can't be satisfied with blockchain or with Ethereum.
We'll talk about this later, dude.
Yes, at lunch. Find in the corner. I'm going to start this one off with Sam, because speaking of stablecoins, actually Lucidity is using stablecoins. So one thing we did notice, like in the last round, which was pretty awesome, is basically we got away from the technology very quickly. A lot of this is theory. The economics comes up, philosophy comes up, personal behavior comes up. I mean, this is why we're having so many disagreements. It's really interesting, though, because all of this comes to the fore very quickly. And when you're trying to sell a product based on blockchain, I know Lucidity's been doing this actively. Like, how is that conversation going for you? Is it easy to have? Is it difficult? Does it start whenever you walk in? You know, if you walk into a place like GroupM and you run into some bumpkin like me, like, how is that sale? Like, is it difficult to do, or do you have to like get the sock puppets out every time?
So it's an excellent question, and the truth is there's a very broad spectrum today of people's personal knowledge of blockchain, so it does depend how far down the rabbit hole someone has gone in understanding distributed ledgers and understanding the immutability of data. Basically, can you manipulate it on the back end or not? But at the end of the day, in business, and if Steve Jobs was here and we were talking business, what I would want to figure out as fast as possible is, Steve, how can I help you make money? can I help you make money? How do you make money, and can I make you more of it, or can I help you save money so ultimately your bottom line is better? And by the way, and Steve was a very smart guy. He'd want to know how I make money, because if I can't make money too, then it's going to be a real short partnership. All right, so if we can all make money together, hence the win-win, now we have an opportunity to move forward. So are we meeting a market need or not? Can I help you make money or not? And at the end of the day, those are the real questions at stake. And so explaining how that happens is, of course, important. And the more you understand about the fundamentals of blockchain, the easier that explanation becomes. But I mean, the fundamentals of partnership in business haven't changed. Marc mentions the velocity of money. That hasn't changed. That still exists in a very real way. So all of these basic theories of economics, whether you want to talk about tokens or not, at the end of the day, we're talking about business. Like all of the products up here, all of the companies up here, we're here because we want to make money and we want to help our partners make money.
Yeah, just to add to that, because we're selling to the brands and advertisers and agencies on a day-to-day basis, and just picking up kind of where Marc left off on his point about kind of cutting out the middleman or making things more efficient. I mean, ultimately, that's what you should be doing. I think the one thing that clearly everybody in the room understands is that there's an additional catalyst as it relates specifically to the ad space around privacy, right? So if you're working in an agency today or you're a brand, I mean, majority of your decisions are being made on top of data, right? So you're decisioning through data, and you have been for years. Well, GDPR and California privacy law, all these things are either in practice or coming, which is now creating this moment, which is, shit, now what? Because is that XL8 Blue Kai segment that I'm getting going to be compliant? Is that location data going to be compliant? Am I exposing myself as a brand, as an agency, as a holdco to increasingly more risk? I think for this particular industry, I think blockchain has a really important place in the ecosystem because one, there's a direct communication between the buyer and seller of the data. That's great. So that concept of actually having an audit trail is essential moving forward. I don't think anybody in this room would suggest that we're going to go backwards on privacy. The genie is very much out of the bottle. We are only going to go forward from here. I don't think the agencies are going to just give up on using data from a decisioning perspective. So getting access to this data that can power the decisions that they're making on a day-to-day basis is really, really essential. And I think that there's a lot of smart people working in this space that can kind of help solve that problem for the $500 billion industry that's advertising today.
And I think you bring up a really good point, right? So everyone here, you're probably here because you recognize that our industry has some problems. And everyone on this side is probably here because we're trying to present some solution to one or multiple of those problems. And that cuts straight to the point, right? That's what's happening here.
Yeah, and I think, though, it's like, would this room even be happening if GDPR in California weren't happening? I mean, this room would probably be happening, but the question would be, would everybody be having the same conversations? I mean, for someone who is going to an agency or going to a brand and explaining to them how that there's an audit trail around the actual data and that it is compliant and that you're not going to get dinged with a fine by using that data, that's really important. It's a funny proposition from the ad world where we joke about it internally, like blockchain's like Fight Club. You don't talk about it. Because as soon as you start talking about blockchain, people they get lost, when at the end of the day, it's about exactly that. It's about solving that specific problem. You have a data issue, you have a compliance issue, you have a privacy issue, I have the solution.
Question for Manny right next to you. So when you do have a conversation with the customer, what are the top 3 questions you have around? Do you actually go and say, this is our solution, and we use the blockchain so? I mean, is that how you do, or do you get questions specifically around that? When you're using blockchain technology, what are the top 3 either most informed or most crazy questions? Take your pick. You get.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I've been talking to a lot of agencies, and most of them think it's horseshit, right? They're like, this stuff doesn't work, right? So I have to be very prescriptive. And so what we'll do is we'll say, okay, here's how domain spoofing happens, right? And so one, the questions are, does it really work, right? Hey. And we hear about all of these big ideas and tokens and everything else, and they're like, what does it mean, right? And then you hear the other things is like, we were talking about privacy. I think a lot of people worry about their information being public, right? They don't actually know what it means yet. So if you have someone that has a fiduciary responsibility to shareholders, whether you like it or not, you can believe whatever you want to believe. But at the end of the day, we've got to solve that problem. I'm not going to say that it can't be solved or it will never be solved, but we have to figure out what that means to big companies, right?
Thank you. That was a lot. So I pass the mic over to Ken. He actually opted for the next question.
Two mics.
Two mics. And a microphone. Actually, great, because I'm going to have you follow up on this. This should be non-controversial. Is there any use case for a blockchain technology on the open market that doesn't tie down to a public chain or a public ledger in some way?
Is there any real-world application that's not tied to a public blockchain?
That's actually feasible and can't be done by other means.
So I would argue that, yeah, I mean, there's use cases and there's different ways to architect this. Mm-hmm. The value of anchoring your architecture to a public blockchain is the fact that you remove that element of trust. And so when you talk about transacting or add commerce peer-to-peer, you have an audit trail. You have all these benefits that go along with that type of architecture. And then the public blockchain acts as a courthouse to enforce the rules of the business agreement that you go into. And so I think that ultimately we will need to be pegged to a public blockchain if we all want to benefit from using a universal standard.
Yeah. So basically, as pointed out earlier next to me, writing into a public chain is currently the slowest form of database since the Roman Empire did.
It's so slow.
Yeah, since the Roman Empire ran their personnel files at the speed of a guy on horseback.
But that's why you don't
need to build everything.
Right. So
that's an important piece, right? Like everybody thinks it's an all or nothing type proposition. Right. That's not necessary.
And we haven't talked about private chains at all.
Yeah.
I actually think private chains are
Amazon, everybody's looking.
will be way more prevalent in ad systems. I mean, because if I'm running media or validating transactions, I don't want the whole world to know what I'm doing, right? If I'm an agency and a DSP and I'm executing a media buy, I don't want that to be fully public.
The data doesn't link to a public chain. You can do side chains, you can do multi-party
We can
knowledge.
encrypt it.
You can do any number.
Yeah.
The number one question is why use a blockchain, not how can we shoehorn a blockchain into
That is
this
an important question, yes.
It's really just why do we need it? And you don't need it.
For you.
Thank you. You don't need it unless you're removing a middleman.
Okay. I think just one more quick thing on just as a group, and also all of you have a responsibility here too. I think there's a lot of misinformation, a lot of speculation, a lot of bad actors in this space. As you can see, we're all working really hard to create value. So I think we all have a duty in this industry to talk about real applications and use cases. I think in the broader ICO space, you guys know, it's a lot of white papers and no reality, and there's a lot of people who've gotten hurt as a result of that. But in our space, we all know this. The agencies want to work on something that can save them money, can make them more money, and you can set it and forget it, because they don't want to do the work, so you can do a lot of the work for them. And I think as long as we have more practical use cases, we all win. And then also reminding people that this isn't 2 years out. This is today, and can be today. And that's why we kind of made sure there was a use case that was public. And we've actually done something about it. So we're announcing privately today this entity called the Executive Blockchain Council. I'm plugging it now. In fact, tonight there's a dinner with a group of you here today and a few other brands. And this council is actually going to be an open council for every company to be a part of. But the number one purpose of it is literacy. And the second purpose is use cases. Practical short-term and mid-term use cases that we can all commit to. And I think the more use cases we share and the more that people see, all the power to us to actually make this happen. So.
And we also have a responsibility not to spam public blockchains. There's a lot of development in the second layer right now on top of public blockchains to address things like scalability, but it's also how you utilize the blockchain. And so a lot of people around the world are building dApps and they're just spamming the blockchain. And so as the space matures, I think we're going to see different architectures. There's going to be hybrid systems where you have side chains, private permissioned blockchains that peg to a public blockchain to enforce rules. And so we're still seeing this evolve.
I mean, right now, when we talk about public, right, we're talking about Ethereum. A year from now, there'll be probably 5 or 10 other operating systems that are much faster. Like EOS, is live. That's much faster, right? Hedera will be live much faster. And so I think that problem goes away, and there's a lot more options in the future.
Or distributed ledgers beyond blockchain.
Oh, my favorite misconception is when someone goes like, "Oh, what's the blockchain?" They think there's a company called the blockchain. Yeah. Well, I mean, yes, but you know what I mean. It's like someone kind of like trademarked the internet. Like we're the internet.
I mean, we're less than a year out from some guy being arrested across river in Queens for selling bitcoins that were actually Chuck E. Cheese tokens. So, and he had $800,000 on him. So we're only so far away from that. So I just want to get a couple of reactions, just where we think the industry is heading, with ad tech and blockchain, in about 5 minutes. Then I'll open up the floor for a couple of questions, and then we'll let things go. Does anybody have any deep needs to talk? Kristoffer, I think you actually opted in for this. If you want to talk quickly of where you think things are going.
Yeah, I mean, I think we'll start to see. I think we'll probably first address supply chain, right? And that's going to be the large at scale initial use case, because we all know there's a lot of waste there. So I would say, and there's pilots going on now, right, on the supply chain management side. So I think you're probably in the next 1 to 2 years, you'll start seeing supply chain management on blockchain happen at scale. I think then beyond that, there's a lot of interesting use cases up here. There's a lot of people working on identity and data, and so you'll start to see a lot of things emerge in that area too.
Anybody else want to speak to this?
I mean, I've kind of already beaten this one to death, but I think the idea there is there's a lot of middlemen in this business. So those guys are going to be under pressure, and these are not small companies. These are massive companies that are sitting on top of giant data lakes and old architecture. It'll be interesting to see how those companies move in the future, especially as some of the young, sort of nimble startups come through. And I think giving that a bit of a tailwind will be the government, who ultimately feels that it's their duty to sort of protect the consumer. And so I think you're going to see increasingly more and more privacy, which is going to put more pressure on brands and advertisers to make sure they're being compliant and that they can find where the data is coming from. I think that's a vicious circle.
I guess.
Yeah, I think.
Sure. Oh wait, Sam.
Thank you, Marc.
Thanks.
I do think that the emergence of blockchain and the investigation into the technology, whether solutions are centralized or decentralized, I think the industry is going to find solutions to most of our major problems. That's very exciting. I think blockchain will apply in some cases. I don't believe it's going to solve all the world's problems, certainly not all the industry's problems. But I do think as a product of us moving forward for this, we will see that certain centralized solutions will cease to exist. If you're not providing value into the ecosystem, I think you'll be exposed. And I think that is going to save everyone a lot of money and time. And that's one of the exciting things that we're looking forward to.
Yeah, so let's talk about supply chains for a second. I'm not a huge fan of cost transparency in supply chains. In fact, it's a felony if you're a government employee to sign a cost plus contract. It's like if I went to my stockbroker and said, I want to buy 100 shares of Apple, but I want to know what the seller stockbroker charged them. That's sort of crazy, but I think that's typically what people do if they don't have transparency around value, so you can't fault them. But let's talk about supply chains and blockchains, right? If all you're using a blockchain for is to record the stated take rates of different sort of stakeholders in a supply chain, you don't need a blockchain for that. Like, just send me an email with a log file, send me a text message with your stated take rate. The fact that you are just putting what you assert to on a blockchain, or if you're a buyer, you're relying on all of the different parties in a supply chain to write to a blockchain, it's a really, really poor use of a distributed ledger, and it doesn't make the data that's asserted any more true, which is one of the most important parts of a blockchain.
Okay. We have time for 1 or 2 questions. Speed is going to be okay. Please call out who you want to answer.
Sure. I guess who I would like to answer. Anybody that's building on a protocol or some piece of infrastructure like Ethereum, Quora, any of those. I was just curious about, we talked a lot about interoperability, layer 2 solutions, scalability. Like, how did you make a decision about which infrastructure you were going to build on? And maybe more importantly, like, what trade-offs did you accept that you were going to have to deal with by making that choice, if that makes sense?
Yeah.
Sure.
I'll take a first stab at it. So we launched AdChain on Ethereum. It was the obvious choice at the time. It still is. It has the most developers, the most support, the most tools, and it's proven. And so we made, there's a lot of trade-offs that you have to make when considering building on blockchains. And we spent 6 months building a protocol that we ended up tearing down. One, because the lawyers said, you absolutely can't do this. This is a security, and we're getting into remuneration, and we're trying to solve ad fraud in the protocol. And it was pretty complicated, and it just turned out to be a bad idea for many reasons. So we tore that down, started over, rewrote a new white paper, and architected a new system that ultimately is token-weighted voting. And so we wanted to really embrace the self-sovereignty aspect of public blockchains, and we wanted to put the control and power in the hands of the people in the industry, the people being advertisers, publishers, and consumers. And so we set off to solve a lot of problems, but ultimately what we want to do is bring a three-sided marketplace together where we can have brands, consumers, and publishers being able to transact seamlessly and have an industry that works. And so we built on Ethereum, but there's these third-generation blockchains that are now emerging, so we're always looking forward and exploring what might be another solution.
Thanks a lot. Next question.
I'm not quite sure who is best to answer this, but I sort of hear a common theme of consumers and businesses and publishers, and consumers should own the data and be able to monetize it and control it, and that we've got blockchain disintermediating inefficient intermediaries. But as a consumer, my data is limitless, and if price is supply and demand, well, I've got infinite supply of my data. How do you make sure that the value of my data does not go to zero?
Because you can buy more products.
Somebody pass Brian a microphone.
Neil probably has strong opinions on this, but you're more valuable as your income is higher, and you have other life events that allow you to buy more shit, right? So, yeah.
Sell my name and email and bank details to 1 million people. The first one for $1, and the millionth one to 1 cent.
Sorry, what?
You're thinking are you thinking the depletion of your value is because you've already placed it out there into the market? Is that your statement?
I'm just saying that if we've got value or price being a factor of supply and demand,
Yes.
then the supply of my email address is limitless.
You got to remember your data is being bought today, right? So your email address is being bought by as many people as can buy it today. So I guess the argument would be made is, why would the dynamic of that pricing change if you change the methodology of how it's actually being purchased? There's technically, you're not increasing the amount of buyers of that individual data.
No, but you are removing the inefficient intermediary, the entity in the middle that is effectively increasing the price because of their own cost base.
I think what you're asking, I guess it means the fact that your data is more accessible doesn't mean that you are bringing your price to zero. It just means that more people can bet on thinking that you'll choose them when they're marketing a product to you, right? So brands are buying the data because they think you are the target that will buy. And then they will pay more if they think you will choose them. They may be wrong. You might end up choosing another brand, but that's why there's that margin there that they'll kind of bet against. But yeah, you don't have to worry about it. Don't worry.
I would say
no, you got nothing to worry about.
I would say it actually goes the other. Sorry.
Doesn't have to keep you up at night.
It actually goes the other way because now there's possibly more demand in the system now, and now your information's verified. It's more secure. I'd say it increases value, not decreases value.
The real reason it doesn't go to zero is you set the price.
Does that mean that I sell my data only for $1? Does that mean that I data for a set.
Well, if you're selling something, you can set the price, right? So the real question to ask is, how do you prohibit resale of your data, right? So the real problem with digital data is that, like, if you sell it, how do you make sure that nobody else buys it? And you know what can't fix that? The blockchain.
Nice. And you want one more, or are you good? Okay. I think it's going to end our panel. It's time's up, and I think this was extremely informative. I'd like to thank all of our panel members for making their time, some of them flying in on overnight flights just to make this. So thank you, everybody. This was fantastic.